Okay, so here we are again. Let's start. This is mostly a clinical paper again, and it's much about the use of Reverie even in difficult situation, and there is something about the Bion's concept of inaccessible unconscious. But let's start from the paragraph that is entitled Step Down Transformers, because otherwise it would be too long to read it all. Huh? So, some patients who protect themselves by building autistic barriers may at times make use of a mechanism comparable to what Meltzer and others have termed dismantling. When this occurs, their senses follow different perceptual paths and no longer work in coordination with each other. At such moments, patients may, for example, focus exclusively on the sheer sound of the words they utter, rather than their meaning, like Beckett's character Crump, who loses himself in the endless repetition of the word spool, drawing out the O, U sound in sensuous preoccupation and delight. In so doing, they reach a state in which they avoid thought and suspend their attention by hyper-attaching it to some form of sensorial self-stimulation. By scotomizing their experience, they retreat from reality, make the object disappear, and exercise their terror of separation and loss. The capacity to coordinate the senses is not fully developed at birth, but is strengthened through the interjection of a positive relationship with the caregiver and the process of somatopsychic integration that follows. When the senses are dismantled, they retreat to an illusory sense of continuity of their self, which has not yet been confronted by the awareness of the separateness of the other, an experience that for them would trigger an unbearable feeling of dread. Patients thereby attempt to escape from their hypnotic fascination with the object, an entity which, on the one hand, could restore the dispersed fragments of their ego, but on the other hand is perceived as a dangerous monster that could swallow or engulf them. These patients almost never bring dreams to their sessions and tend to endlessly and monotonously repeat the same stories from their daily lives. They drain words of their meaning, turning them into mere sensorial elements, dull, empty tones devoid of affective significance. Due to their extreme fragility, attempts to introduce something new into their arid mental landscapes may be experienced as painful. They perceive closeness as a threat and only allow emotions in on a Lilliputian scale. They seem lost in a two-dimensional reality, a grey-colored world with neither stories nor characters. And when they do, on occasion speak of characters, they are not engaging. The stage of their mind seems empty. Confronted with such desolate scenes, the analyst's predominant feeling is that of conducting a dreary, hopeless analysis devoid of the living images that move us. All emotion feels as if it is being sucked into a black hole. Like black holes, autistic nuclei create a zone around themselves that defy contact and exchange. Here, the trapped light is the emotions, and the radiations that reflect and reveal the existence of the autistic nuclei are the turbulences produced in the analyst. These turbulences, invariably occurring at moments where a new balance is about to set, allow us to see things. However, they differ from turbulences developing in the treatment of borderline or psychotic disorders. In fact, they almost seem to be the opposite. Here, everything that occurs is characterized by negativity. Nothing seems to be happening. And yet, despite this, the analyst comes to feel a strong and almost intolerable tension. Sessions may become pervaded by a sense of stasis or death. While the analyst's mind is powerful, solicited as container, it is as if we were assisting in the catastrophe of the collapse of time, or a building suddenly imploded due to an abrupt increase in pressure on its surface. What instrument, then, should be used to make the terrible forces acting on the surfaces of the psyche visible? How may we reduce them to a bearable level? The answer is that my answer is that the analyst must in some way experience, suffer this collapse, and through reverie try to transform this negativity into images and thoughts, restoring continuity, temporality, and meaning. In the autistic areas of the mind, the pressure I am trying to describe is connected with the tantalizing and dangerous nature of the object. The subject despairs of existing in the other's desire, and thus of being recognized and becoming alive. It is for this reason that even though relationships are vital to the patient, he or she refuses all offers of them. The internal suffering is extremely intense, yet well hidden. It is comparable to a state of agony or near death. But it is one which the patient barely feels, at least at first, and that the analyst personally perceives as boredom, uselessness, and claustrophobic sensations. The analyst may be haunted with doubts, with the fear of finding himself trapped, empty, and without resources, struggling to maintain composure, to stay still, alive, or alert. Time never passes. It stops, melts away like the clock in Salvador Dali's famous painting. But even these feelings may be seen as a translation and representation of the indistinct yet crushing threat troubling the patient, who, as it were, senses the paralyzing presence of Godzilla without seeing him. This is taken from a dream of another of my patients that dreamt of Godzilla. It was huge, but he could only see its feet, and of course did not rely what he could see to the huge figure of the monster. So these experiences may also prove threatening to the analyst, who must resist the temptation to shut himself in a mirror image state of autism of his own, turn off his attention, reset the tension, and withdraw to his own private thoughts in order to survive. What is therefore required of the analyst is a great deal of patience, and the knowledge that transformations, if they do occur, can be painful and for long times barely perceivable. As in the facilitated communication used with autistic children, the analyst needs, you know what it is, at least it has been described to me, not with you, the therapist holds the end of the child, and then he becomes able to perform. So it's just an image. The analyst, I don't know if this is correct, but this is what I've been saying. The analyst needs to stay constantly and very closely in touch with these patients in the sense of sustaining, enhancing, and strengthening their fragile narcissism, while being respectful of their self-protective need for stasis to avoid overstimulation. Thus, the hypersensitivity of such patients, protected by the shield of autistic functioning, is best approached when the analyst painstakingly strives to detect the most minute signs of movement where everything seems to be still, looking for elements of growth where there only seems to be arrested development, granting hope and trust even when skepticism may seem the most sensible attitude. As the analyst exposes the patient to his own capacity to tolerate frustration, to his faith that it is possible to give things a meaning, and to his thinking method that he offers the patient the chance to internalize the transformational experience. The image used by Ferro to describe the analyst's intervention in autistic states is that of voltage. If the voltage of an interpretation is too high, it may infuse an unsustainable tension into the relational field, incurring the risk that field will collapse. When this happens, it implies that the analyst has failed to use an adequate step transformer, this is the metaphor, to reduce the intensity and impact of his intervention. Consequently, it is always necessary to activate the security device, so to say, of a second look or of an internal monitor to try and catch the signals of the field and the moment-to-moment clues to its suffering. The voltage must be indirectly proportional to the extent of the patient's deficiencies in alpha function or in the capacity of his thinking and dreaming apparatus. Sometimes, as a situation of massive trauma, the problem is an excessive sensorial influx which may overwhelm the accepting and transforming capacity of even a sufficiently developed mind. Less despairing than the image of a black hole and with more room for potential positive movement, the metaphor of voltage points to the differential the analyst activates each time he introduces his opinion on what is happening. The points of view of two separate subjects can never completely overlap. If, however, they are similar enough, a fruitful interplay of identity and difference may occur. To be sure, in terms of psychic development, difference is no less important than emotional attunement. Patient and analyst may share an emotional experience, and the patient's mind as container may become more elastic and expand. So, this point is very important from a technical point of view, because, as you know, one of the most important techniques in the history of psychoanalysis is confrontation. Huh? And so when you ask the patient to face certain things, certain truths I think that very often this kind of working does not respect the capacity of the patient to accept and tolerate what you are telling. And as Ferro and myself wrote in a paper on confrontation that is in the inquiry, I think, we call this kind of confrontation Charles Fidal OK Coral, Challenge to the OK Coral, which is a Western movie, when at a certain point there was this, And on the contrary, I think that if we follow the unconscious communication of the patient, then the patient is continually giving us signals of the level of acceptability he has for what we introduce in the field. And in the end, we don't have any need of these strong confrontational moments. Another thing I'd like to say is that you already saw in this theoretical part that I use many metaphors. No? And this is already a way to introduce to the also not only saying but showing how to do it to the topic of the paper. So the image of the black hole, the image of the voltage, I think can be very useful and even make theory alive. By the way, the metaphor of the voltage came out also from an experience I had, because at a certain point I bought a new hard disk and it needed some step transformer. I don't remember well, but it was kind of instead of 12, I don't know, let's say 20, so not 200. No? And I had a set of, I had accumulated in years a set of different step transformers. And I said, well, if it is 12, 20, should be okay. I used 20. You are laughing, so you know already the result. I lost all the movies I had in this hard disk. So we need to be as precise as we can, no? To use the right voltage. Ferro expresses this also with another metaphor. Sometimes he says, no, this is a wave, no? And this is the one of the patient. Sometimes you can use this huge difference between what you say. The wave represents the difference of perspectives. But with some patients whose way of thinking, for example, this autistic patient is a bit like this, you can just move a bit higher or a bit lower, but you have to stay really very close to what the patients say. And that is something that we already saw this morning when I said it can be frustrating for our narcissism to admit that sometimes the most useful intervention are just to repeat a few words or to... But this is true, we have to accept the reality, and then we can recover our narcissism because we say that this is simple, but behind we have a very sophisticated theory. and that which is true, by the way, and that to achieve this kind of receptivity to the unconscious life of the field, it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all, I can tell you, because I have many students all around the world, and even if supervision after supervision, and I tell you this, and I tell you this, and I tell you this, still, yesterday the highway was closed, and they mean the highway that was closed, and they do not transform it into something else. At that point, I'm so frustrated that sometimes I say, look, psychoanalysis has to do with the understanding of unconscious. Unconscious is the tool we use in order to cure psychological suffering. I don't care if you cook it in the classical way, so give a transference interpretation. I don't care if you use Melanie Klein, so give me an example of interpretation of the unconscious fantasy. Better if you use the analytic field theory, but show me that you are able to work with the concept of the unconscious, no? Because very, very often nowadays, no, even within psychoanalysis, there is this tendency, it's incredible, but and I think that interpersonalism has much to do with this, in not really use this, no matter within which one of our main, but this is maybe it's another discourse. Let's go. The clinical vignette. So, the Puma. I see a quite melancholic girl once a week vis-a-vis. So, to me, it's not so important the frequency of the session. Yes, of course, there are differences, and it's not so important vis-a-vis or the couch. The couch is important, of course, but I had a patient that used to sit on the floor for 2 years, and it was okay. What is really important is the capacity for an analytic, sophisticated listening. This is what is important. So, psychoanalysis, the quality of psychoanalysis is not given by the number of sessions, it's given by the quality of the analytic listening, for me. So, I see a quite melancholic girl once a week vis-a-vis. She's always on time. She puts her bag on the floor and sits up straight in the armchair, her head slightly tilted to one side, a shy and elusive look on her face. Then she remains silent for 3/4 of an hour. Each time I am immediately overwhelmed by a sense of oppression. Time seems to stand still. Perhaps A needs to slow down until she stops time altogether. Perhaps too often she went through traumatizing situations, events which have made her feel not really alive and without any control over things. Her nanny, whom A considered her true mother, died when she was 9 years old. Could this occurrence also represent the reopening of an older wound? I mean that she had already lost her mind, because, nice lapsus. Yes, her mind, because she had lost maybe her mother from the start, meaning that maybe her mother had not acted as a caregiver in an adequate way from the start. Gradually, similar to the way in which we turn off the sound of the TV and become more aware of the small details to which we were previously oblivious, I realize I am paying more attention to my own sensations and what is entering my visual field. I'm getting more in tune with my own body and posture, as though A wanted to draw my attention to these primitive levels of somato-psychic non-integration, as though she herself needed to entertain a purely fusional and sensorial relationship in the safe womb of the setting. I am reminded of Winnicott's distinction between, again, id needs and ego needs. And of course, what does Winnicott say? That in order to feel that there are forbidden impulse, you need having interiorized the law. Otherwise, you cannot experience the conflict. And in order to interiorize the law, first you have to achieve an ego. So this is very important, I think, this distinction. And think that perhaps here words would only be appropriate if they were in tune with the latter, otherwise they could be hurtful. A seems to be really far away, yet at the same time she's totally aware of my every move. During each session, I try to get in contact with her, but to no avail. I resign myself to silence, pure Beckett. I say to myself, but you see, first of all, I have to tell you that after a certain number of sessions, I was so frustrated that I said, because on one side, this has to be said, on one side this patient has these difficulties, on the other side she's a brilliant student at university, on very difficult topics. So it's, and once I told her, look, do you think that this is useful? No, that you come here every time and you don't say a single word? And she said, yes, okay, let's go. So after that, I didn't ask anymore, and because she was so, no. Again, so at a certain point, the image of Beckett came to my mind, no, to express some desperation, but soon after, I remember that I do love Beckett very much. Really, I do love Beckett, the theater. Huh? And this thought leads me to consider the possibility offered by analysis to stage even the most extreme situation, exactly like in some of Beckett's pieces. Yes, I've become more hopeful. I know that even my feeling this way, my feeling this way is useful to her. At times, she has managed to tell me so herself. Feeling me a witness to her suffering makes her feel more at ease. Each time she integrates a bit more, thanks to the space I reserve for her, both physically in the room and symbolically in my mind. It helps me follow to my own flux of ideas, as though they were a commentary on what is happening. It is the negative, like in photography, of a dialogue which cannot exist yet, as in the novel Mr. Money, by which you know very well, I imagine, Abraham Yoshua. Maybe this is not the right pronunciation. But good, right. Where the reader only finds out what is said by one of the two interlocutors in a telephone conversation. By following my stream of thought, I once found myself fantasizing I was at the pool with A, because a metaphor sometimes I give the patient is that if you want to learn, of course, to swim, you have to get into the pool. I cannot give you just a handbook who did not yet feel up to going in the water. The image transformed into a beautiful Sardinian beach, similar to a tropical setting. I remember, though, the day I had been there. If somebody is interested, is Stintino. It's a tropical, really wonderful. It's in the north of Sardinia. But the day I was there with my kids, my family, everywhere there were jellyfish. It was really, this is tantalizing. Huh? And so you saw that this is the kind of sea that you would almost drink it. So it's beautiful and clear, but I understand that A is diffident and paralyzed by fear. But then I begin to think there must be something else that she can see and I cannot. Perhaps it is something even more terrifying than jellyfish. I think of those, no, it's not those, it's a patient of mine. So another patient of mine came to my mind. It was an analysis of 8 years, first 4 sessions and then 3 sessions a week after a dramatic separation, and it really changed only half a year before the end of it, in a very nice way. But once, and so for so many years, he didn't dare to have any other relationship, so it was as if he was really frightened by the idea of getting close to a woman. But he told me that with some friends they went to the sea, somewhere in Egypt, where you could watch sharks. And I asked, look, I said, isn't that a bit dangerous? No, he said, because I've been explained that at that hour in the day, they had already eaten. I said, listen, if that day you meet the only shark that, I don't know, was late, what? And so we laughed a lot, and we laughed, and we interpreted this, that of course you can interpret it in different ways, from different perspectives, that he was more afraid of women than of sharks. But now this memory of mine came to the mind. No? So, you see, I went from the jellyfish to the shark, which is much more frightening. And what I mean here is that helped me to intuit, understand, hypothesize, that the fears that this patient had were very, very deep. No? Of course, the jellyfish can be, no, but the shark is really a figure of a very, very, very persecutory object. No? So, does A also see or sense sharks? Perhaps her coral reef has gaps which could let in terrible things, the disturbing presences living deep in her unconscious. And the gaps opened in the aesthetic of being, the basic frame of the personality provided by the mother as transformational object, were caused by traumas suffered we have to think in the earliest life, prior to the construction of the ego, and subsequently inscribed as sensory motor schemes in the inaccessible unconscious. So why this unconscious is inaccessible? Because it's made of implicit memories, not of declarative, representational memories that you can recall. Huh? I then associate to another patient B. Okay, this I already told you, so we go on. Through this reverie, I realized that I have transformed a quantity of emotions from one scene with B to another with A, offering tentative meaning to something which could seem to be nonsense from the outside. The couple staying there 3/4 of an hour without saying anything to each other. I know that it's more common in analysis on the couch, and I also had colleagues that told me that even sometimes even an entire analysis was almost completely silent. And of course, I think that only psychoanalysis maybe can give some meaning to this kind of situation. It would be, I cannot think of anything else that could put the therapist in a situation where he tolerates this and also thinks that it is useful and has a reliable, coherent frame, theoretical frame to justify what he's doing. I'm now able to reformulate the situation with A in these terms. The problem is how to feed the sharks or tame the wolves, like St. Francis, in order to make them less dangerous. But at this initial stage, I still know very little about pumas. Weeks and months go by. One day, the orange bag that she brings to each session reminds me of Little Red Riding Hood, lost in the woods. I suppose to a certain extent she sees me both as the grandmother nanny that brought her up and the wolf disguised as the grandmother, like in the fairy tale. Then, as I walk her to the door, she turns one day, and I at once notice a figure on one side of her bag and the word Puma. I'm surprised, but start to see a glimmer of light in the dark. I tell myself that inside her there is something primitive, ferocious, maybe very angry. Here come the sharks, rather the wolves, nay, the pumas. For A, keeping still and quiet may be a way of representing herself as both mortified by a cold and distant maternal gaze and paralyzed in a defensive reaction, such as playing dead when faced with terror. It may also be a way of trapping inside the explosive puma emotions. A compresses these feelings until they are totally flat. Then she curls up inside an invisible yet resistant autistic shell. However, this time I have perhaps found a way of what she has been unconsciously trying to tell me about what is going on. Difficulties aside, despite our near total silence, we are starting to write a script which is beginning to have a small cast. The casting has begun, as we try to find actors good enough to play the role of the proto-emotions that have not yet found their place in the scene of the analysis. I do consider these actors not only as my associations or reverie, but as co-created in the analytic field by the crossing of reciprocal projective identifications. In this instance, I interpreted to her the meaning I assigned to the figures on her bag, and she silently accepted to play this game. In this way, but not, she didn't start to speak, but we started the play of the bags. In this way, she started to communicate even consciously with me, but in this indirect way. A few sessions later, I discovered that the other side of her bag contains the image of two rabbits cuddling each other, drawn in a childish manner. They join the tiny pair of red pumas that are part of the famous logo of the brand of athletic shoes as actors in her unfolding story. Could it be that A is showing me that she's slowly conquering small shares of emotional ambivalence, two tiny pumas, one on each shoe, next to two large playful rabbits on the back? We have to do, how does Beyoncé, making the, help me out there, making the best of a bad job. So, I think, either we renounce or otherwise, no. This is how A begins to recruit my alpha function to begin to formulate and structure a psychic device that will allow her to represent and possibly pierce the bubble of grief she has been living in for so long. Through a narration that develops without words, she is now able to put a number of fragments of herself and her life on the stage that analysis offers her. Thus, she manages to express her intense urge to reveal herself, even in complete silence. When this need is satisfied by a suitable response of the object, the sense we have of ourselves and the continuity of our existence is strengthened. By the way, reading this account, this story, it could seem that this went very quickly. Not at all. I put together here fragments of understanding that were that arrived only from time to time. So there was always this bit difficult, and from time to time some meaning, some possibility to give meaning to what was happening. But there was some development. At a certain point, Hay swaps bags. This time the writing says legami, which in Italian means both relationship, and then in this case is pronounced legami, and tie me up, legami. And so perhaps in this way she's expressing the fear and yearning of a connection which, as seen in Almodovar's film Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down, which in Italian is legami, atame, is a mutual kidnapping and a reference to a Sadian world of abjection as the primary repression of the maternal body. This is Cristina. Then still another new bag arrives, camouflage in design and color, which shouts fight, danger, ambush, hiding, guerrilla. Moreover, I noticed some time later that on this bag the word energy has been written many times in tiny letters. Is A informing me that her energy is being robbed by the relative disconnection between intelligence and emotion? An energy which must nonetheless exist, or else it would be very hard to explain how she manages to pass her arduous math exams at university. By the way, she just completed a PhD. When she arrived, it was at the beginning of university. Thus, I began to draw maps of the emotions activated in the field of analysis and consequently of A's internal world. At the same time, I see we have found a way to communicate and give a shape to her emotions that she's yet unable to express in words. So sometimes I tell her what comes to my mind. I say that I play really the clown. Sometimes you have to play the clown. Indeed, I think that if at times the analyst feels free to express doubts or to confess he's uncertain of how to behave with respect to some facts of the analysis, then the patient may enter a state of ambiguity which might prove useful. Indeed, by introducing the analyst on the scene in a new role, a third or alternative space is created through the self-revelation, self-disclosure, favoring self-reflectivity and thus subjectivation. Of course, from the analytic point of view, self-revelation does not escape the paradigm of the setting and of the oniric in the session. In this respect, self-disclosure might be introduced and understood less as the eruption of the analyst's life fragments, something that was completely and rigidly forbidden by classical psychoanalysis. You never speak of yourself. No? And more as the entrance of a new unconventional kind of actor, very aware of this role and committed to disclosing it to the audience, kind of Brechtian actor. I mean that even when an analyst tells something, of course he has to be very, he has not to exaggerate and so and so and so. But it is not so much his life, but it's also this, a little piece of his life becoming an actor on the stage of the theater of analysis. On the contrary, we have this ingenuous idea that self-disclosure is only the analyst revealing something on herself or himself. It's more complicated or complex. From the field perspective, all references to past or present private life events made by patient or analyst are immediately virtualized, becoming fictional characters of the analysis or launching in the analytic field. The moment eventually arrives when we begin to talk of everything above tactfully and delicately. Which bag is it today? I ask. The one with the cuddles or the combat? A laughs about it, but of course doesn't say anything. Then a few more steps, as on my suggestion, you see, we have to be creative, because otherwise, I mean, the psychoanalysis has to be for the patient, not the patient for psychoanalysis. Anyway, within certain limits, of course, but then a few more steps on my suggestion. We begin talking about films and books, discussions seemingly going nowhere. She tells me her favorite film is Amélie, the story of a young motherless waitress from Montmartre who finds a small box containing childhood souvenirs and toys. She asks her neighbor, the glass man, to help her find the box's owner. Seeing how happy she has made him, she decides to dedicate her life to fixing the things that are wrong in the lives of those around her. Another time, of course you understand that this is very meaningful, no? Another time, Hay tells me of her favorite book, The Mad Devil by Enzensberger. It is the story of Robert, a 10-year-old boy who keeps having nightmares about math, but then a wizard begins to show up in his dreams, a funny-looking little man who slowly helps him to overcome his fear of math in the course of 11 nights. The silent bag game has turned into the book game. Each week, A would read something, be it a story or a chapter from a novel, which we would then discuss, so to say. Another book was The Solitude of Prime Numbers by Paolo Giordano. To talk about himself in the novel, the narrator uses prime numbers dividable only by one or themselves, it seems. My kid told me that this is not perfectly, it's not really accurate, but doesn't matter. As a metaphor, these numbers sometimes appear in twos, though always separated by another number between them. Thus, they are a pair that can never really be together. His next choice, also very appropriate, was The Daydreamer by Ian McEwan. The Italian title is L'inventore dei sogni, the dream inventor. This is exactly what my efforts were directed towards, the creation of a space for dreams. The child protagonist of the book, Peter, has various dreams. First, he imagines a magic dust, which makes his mom, dad, and sister disappear. Second, he envisions giving the school bully a sort of interpretation, reducing him to tears only by using words, and making him feel ashamed of his misdeeds. Finally, Peter dreams of turning into a cat. At this point of her account, much to my surprise and really gratitude, believe me, A turns around and says, kind of what should be happening here. Due to our constant attempts at creating dreams, it seems as though, now we can say, the puma is slowly turning into a house-trained cat. I mean by this that violent, unmanageable emotions were now on the verge of being transformed into thoughts. I continue to listen for new images to surf, either coming from A or from myself, that afterwards might confirm or not that we were in contact. Silence played a significant role in A's treatment and returned even after the most fertile moments. It was the necessary insulator that kept tensions activated during every session at a tolerable level. Faced with Ace's silence, I could only keep track of my own emotional reactions, stay alert and be ready to dream Ace interrupted and undreamed dreams, mindful that the analyst should not try too hard to push the patient out of an autistic shell. On the one hand, such pushing might neglect recognizing that silence may be necessary as a protective device to reduce the voltage, or pushing might reflect the analyst's attempt to escape from contact with the more dead, depressed parts of the patient's mind, or a refusal to let himself be treated transferentially as the patient's depressed, despairing internal object. Such moments require that the analyst pay careful attention to his own emotional reaction, physical impressions, and the images arising in his mind, presumptively assuming that each element in his stream of associations represents a private, non-verbalized comment about what is going on. On some occasions, elements of this stream of consciousness can be verbalized. For instance, as I said this morning, like the psychologist played by Bruce Willis, dealing with an isolated dumb boy, the analyst can simply describe what he sees or what he thinks is happening. What Ace treatment illustrates, I hope, is that in order to acquire or strengthen the ability to represent, it may be essential to first relieve the earliest stages of life, when sensoriality was paramount, and repeat the primitive process of strengthening the indwelling of the psyche into the body as described by Winnicott. With patients like Kay, who have been so seriously wounded, at least in part of their personality, the anonymous pre-reflexive and pre-personal tapestry of intersensoriality, intercorporeality, representing the foundation of the subject, when there is still no actual self-awareness, shifts from pre-categorical background endowed with significance, albeit an obscure one, to figure. Indeed, as persuasively argued by the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty, by the way, from whose writings Willy and Madeleine Baranger drew inspiration in developing their notion of the analytic field, at this stage, subject and object are not separate, rather, they stand in a dialectical relationship to one another. Subject and object are not definite autonomous entities, pure presences to self, but continuously mold each other through a fluid process of transactions regulated, Merleau-Ponty says, by the porosity of the flesh. In fact, they co-originate from a primordial medium to which they both belong. In this archaic context, to touch also means simultaneously to be touched. Our sense of the world is mediated not only intellectually, it is also informed by the direct experience of the body. This sense of reality stems from incarnated existence and is already, though rudimentarily, developed even before a form of self-awareness is established. Accordingly, Merleau-Ponty affirms, I am a field, an experience, that is, a system of relationships. It is worth pointing out that as the ego will never completely free itself from the constraints of the environment that surrounds it and of specific life situations, this primordial stage is destined to establish itself as a constant form of experience also throughout adult life. It is precisely this intersubjective relational framework that Melanie Klein strives to illuminate with her obsessive dramatic observations on how the fragile ego of the baby is not a separate entity in the way a subject will be separate from an object in later life. In fact, in her account, this early ego, she says, incessantly, but in the words of Kristeva, incessantly consumes the breast from within and ejects the breast into the outside world by constructing, vacating itself while constructing, vacating the other. In turn, Bion approaches the same issue through his notion of proto-mental system. The proto-mental system I visualize as one in which, he says, physical and psychological or mental are undifferentiated. It is a matrix from which spring the phenomena which at first appear on a psychological level and in the light of psychological investigation to be discrete things, only loosely associated with one another. You see, this is very important. Phenomena which appears to be discrete, but of course implies they are not, meaning they are not separated. It is from this matrix that emotions proper to the basic assumption flow to reinforce, pervade, and on occasion to dominate the mental life of the group. Since it is a level in which physical and mental are undifferentiated, it stands to reason that when distress from this source manifests itself, it can manifest itself just as well in physical forms as in psychological. End of quote. Bion's remark is especially significant insofar as it aims to account for the notion of an image, a psychic representation, translating something which is somatic in itself. It also illuminates how such a reversibility between body and mind can operate not only within one individual, but also between two different persons. Furthermore, Bion explains how, due to the incessant and unconscious interplay between analyst and patient, the analyst's reveries can sometimes translate traumatic experiences of the patients inscribed in the non-repressed or inaccessible unconscious. traumas which produce a hole in the sensorial floor of the ego. In other words, he implicitly argues that in the same way the reliability of the setting and the physical and rhythmic elements that make it possible can increase the patient's ability to think, the work of figurability carried out by the analyst can heal the wounds of the body as a semiotic device. That is, a body understood as a language, as a way to generate experience, which is certainly prevalent in early life, but will then always go hand in hand with symbolic language. In this respect, one may even hypothesize that precisely in those circumstances when the analyst deals with black holes in the inaccessible unconscious of the patient, the restoration of a certain degree of figurability may constitute a crucial therapeutic element. Now, I don't know if we have time, because the end will take another 15 minutes. But I think that essentially we already touched this point. So if you agree, I think we could leave this half an hour for the audience. Right? Okay, so thank you again.
Thank you yet again for such a rich and evocative paper. Before turning to the audience, I would like to say a few words. Reading and rereading your papers in the last weeks makes me feel as if my mind is full of your dream thought and reveries. As Bion described consciousness and unconsciousness being inside each other, so are your ideas weaving themselves into our minds. This state has been inspiring for me, as for all of us this morning. Following your brilliant exposition of your theoretical background, you have now illustrated succinctly how you work clinically with those concepts in treating and reviving the inaccessible unconscious. From the multitude of insights and questions that your papers have evoked in me, I will state two as a point of departure for discussion by the audience, which will of course bring up further thoughts and considerations. Having you today as a guest of the Winnicott Center is a rare opportunity to hear your opinion about Winnicott's clinical theory concerning the inaccessible unconscious. Comparing your intriguing and thoughtful ideas and their clinical implications, could you refer to Winnicott's ideas about regression to dependence and failing in the way of the patient? I would raise two questions respectively. What would you say is the difference, if any, between focusing on reverie on the one hand, and on the other hand, of providing a facilitating environment of holding, management, and adaptation to the patient's needs, part of which is using reverie? Such an environment enables the patient's mind to experience what occurs in the actual field or transition of space, and enhance the evocation of beta elements which force their way into pre-representability. I will let you hear the second question too. In the poetry of dream and depersonalization, you write, when we are not in step in the patient's depersonalization, when we are not in step, the patient's depersonalization is reflected in the depersonalization of the analytic field. A depersonalized field would function too concretely and too intellectually. You suggest an intersubjective field theory, yet in your clinical illustrations you present yourself only as a facilitator of transformation and as not as part of the recurring and enacted unrepresented perception of the absent other. For instance, would you consider that the puma, the sharks, the Godzilla would stand for an unrepresented perception of you as the dangerous absent object?
Yes, of course. Yes. Thank you.
I would like to hear, we would all like to hear your comments, and also, of course, the more questions from the audience.
I can start. Well, of course, as you saw today, I was even myself a bit surprised, because reading these three papers together, which is the first time it happens to me, I realized how much I rely on Winnicott. Even if I consider him an author that I love a lot, I like to read, I use his concept, but not an author on whom directly I am working and elaborating a lot. So it's more like an uncle, I don't know, a cousin. No. But today this paper somehow shows the opposite, that somehow I absorbed so much. So this means that I find his discourse very close to what I'm trying to develop. Of course, this is also to say that my knowledge is limited. My knowledge of Winnicott is limited, is not complete, and to more thoroughly to try to compare and differentiate would need much more study on my side. If you mention it's a bit difficult to me to say how much the concept of regression to dependency meets the theory of the analytic fit. But I can tell you what it makes me think. It makes me think that Winnicott was very much aware of the importance, as I've stressed during all the morning, of interacting with the patient at these very primitive levels. Well, we might call them regressive, yes, but would we call our way of communicate semiotically, even at a sophisticated way, as regressive? Not necessarily, because the meaning is made of meaning and the body of the world, and the semiotic part of our communication is not necessarily to be called regressive. No? So yes and no. Yes and no. Huh? I have to say that we don't use this notion of regression. This is a classical notion, we don't use it at all, I have to say. And if I had to try to point out some difference, I'd say that our attention very much goes to the molecular level of this construction of the mind that Bionian illustrates with the concept of atonement. Then I also, I don't know how much Winnicott's conceptualization of the unconscious is related to the classical one, or how much it is different, and it has to be very different from Bionian's one. And as I said this morning, everything changes if the concept of unconscious changes. Of course, we can say we can use this notion of reverie, hallucinosis, only because we have before a certain conceptualization of the unconscious as an apparatus for symbolization. And also, I don't know, so I'd be curious to know more about Winnicott's technique in the clinic. If everything was within the area of the transitional area, so to say, which is very close to the intersubjective third or to the analytic field, is in the same, with the same radicality that we use or not. So I don't know, because, but this would be, for example, some points I'd go to see, looking for differences and analogies. Then the second thing was the yes, of course. But in fact, this is your second question. Is the question that I address in the part that I did not I did not read, because just three lines to give you an answer. If I remember well, I haven't read this, but at a certain point I says, for example, I say my reveries can be seen as a narrative terms of the emotional field in which we were both immersed, the result of the continuing invisible unconscious communication between analyst and patient. Godzilla, the jellyfish, the sharks, the old patient, the coral reef, the pumas or the tennis shoes, the carton rabbits or the bag and so on, all are functions of the intermediate space we generate together. A kind of, wait, please, a kind of, because I'm answering, a kind of in-between or halfway psychic region. All of them are characters in a polyphonic novel constantly engaging with each other and voicing different points of view. So, I understand you, if I understand well what you say, is, would you take responsibility in the analytic field as being the shark, the gel? Of course, yes. Of course, yes. And this is exactly what I mean when I say that we have to follow the patient's indication. No? In fact, I spoke about the ambivalence when I said she had 2 little tiny red pumas on her shoes, but 2 little rabbits on her back. So, love and hate between us. But there's something more to be said, because we could always also interpret these figures, for example, the shark as transference productions, which is something that I do not do. I mean, not from this perspective. So to me, when there is a character, it's more like an hologram in the field. I really mean that it is co-generated, co-constructed, because otherwise we fall again in what belongs to the patient and what to the analyst, what comes from the East. No, we put all of this between parentheses, which we should say every time, not the patient is a shark to the analyst, or the analyst is a shark to the patient, but in the field now, in the relationship, in the atmosphere, there is sharkness. And it's not so much about establishing who is the shark. Of course, I am the shark for the patient and the patient for me, because immediately, unconsciously, there is always a reaction. The important point is, what can I introduce in the field that can change this atmosphere, from sharkness, for example, to, I don't know, catness. So I don't know if I said. Then, what is the limit of this discourse? That when then I have to write and show a vignette, I cannot every time say, this is an hologram, this is the third, this is not. No. There is always this reversibility and reciprocity. At a certain point, the analyst has to take the responsibility for the shark, and it thinks to his own contribution to the, so to say, the sharpness, and tries to change it. No? Okay.
have a strange feeling, and also exciting, about reading of not knowing enough Winnicott. I'm excited by the feeling that I have now, that the possibility of meeting a person who don't know enough Winnicott with a person who don't know enough Bion. And I think in this field can grow very interesting thoughts and ideas, because I thought about the way Bion speaks about functions. And I thought maybe there is the concept of Winnicott of true and false self, which can be perceived as a construct. But when I think about it now, maybe it's a way of being, a way of functioning. The difference between the true and false self is the way the self is being מבטא את עצמו, חי את עצמו, live himself in the present moment. So for me it's very interesting to continue this not knowing and searching. It illuminates so many concepts. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd say that Bion very explicitly theorizes the importance of not knowing, and no, this is really very important. And I'd say that Winnicott does the same in a different way, because every time he displaces us with these incredible paradoxes, he shows us that we did not know. And every time we have to rediscover that, no, yes, we have to do with the paradoxes, with not the analyst that knows that does not speak, or every time he says things that surprises us, and if they surprise us, it is because they confront us with our ignorance, and at the same time show how this ignorance is important. Yeah?
I'll try and speak. Can you hear me?
המיקרופון בדרך אליי.
Thanks for everything you brought today. You spoke a lot about sometimes the disconnection between soma and mind, between, I understand it also as body and mind, and actually something about transformation or the purpose of therapy as making also a connection there. And yet, much of the thought today, even though it's doing a lot of imagery and unconscious in all kinds of way, the somatic as soma, as body, as feeling also in the body and not just emotion, which are all connected, is almost neglected. And it's a bit neglected in psychoanalysis generally. But since you bring it as a main field or arena of connection, I wonder about this whole field in a way being neglected in observation, in even knowing how to contact it. I mean, you bring it a lot in the notion of skin to skin and how primal it is, how central it is to a container, and yet there is something that the whole language doesn't speak in the language of the body.
Yes and no. Because, of course, this is the what is unsayable, no? By definition, how can we show the importance of the body, the importance, the centrality of the thinking body, huh? The way we give meaning to our experience, also to our movements, in the way we organize our spaces and rhythms. From one point of view, I think that it's already a lot if this becomes an important topic, an important issue, because it was not this. No? So, and from this point of view, I'd say that this morning we said more than this. I cannot imagine how to say more than this about the importance of the body, of the emotions, and the conceptualization of how you can be the symbolic, even if you are still an infant, and so on. Of course, I could say much more. I don't know, the concept of horizon in Heidegger, and so on and so on and so on. And Merleau-Ponty, and what is pre-categorical, and so on. But to show the thing in action, so to say, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. Then I'd like to ask you how that could be done in a paper. How could you show the body, not only talk about the body, but show the body in the same time you are saying, showing also, trying to give the feeling of how the musicality, the rhythm, participate in the construction of meaning. And I think that also this I tried a bit this morning. In the measure, if not all of you, some of you felt what I said, no? Received not only notions, concepts, even sophisticated ideas, but even the rhythm of it, the emotional participation. No? This is, I think, the only way I can convey also my understanding, no, of the importance of the body, that in a paper can only be the body of words, sentences, the rhetoric of the text. In fact, Bion used to say that a paper should transmit to the reader or to the listener the emotions, should not be cold, should not be arid. And in the Paris seminar, he says, when it is the last time that a paper in the international journal really moved you? So, this is very important. And in fact, as the editor of my journal now, luckily I'm done with it, this was one of the main points. And I wrote that all the big authors of psychoanalysis will never be surpassed, because maybe for some concepts, yes, of course, and this is good, because we are in a scientific arena, but what will not be surpassed will be the way they represented our object of study, the mind, in a corporeal way, with the body of their sentences, with the rhythm of their writings, as writers, big writers, as artists. I mean, when we read Freud, there is something moving, his special ethos, no? Ethics, for example, the way he writes. When we read Melanie Klein, it's a scary movie, it's a horror movie, but it's great. No? And when we read Winnicott, well, okay, Winnicott is the only one that I wait for the evening to have some times, and I say, oh, tonight I will have some, not always, from time to time. When we read Bion, it's also great, because in certain pages he can drive you crazy. In other pages you see the genius, is brilliant. And sometimes you see that immediately emotions erupts in Bion's pages. So concepts can change, paradigms can change, but I think we always will read our best authors because exactly they are capable of showing also the body. To mobilize, I don't know what it is in English, also emotions, and not just, for example, I really hate those many gray, dead papers full of jargon, full of incredible sophistic things. Well, I hope that from what I can, I really conveyed also some understanding. The final, in 4 years, I only published one paper of mine in my own journal, and it came from a meeting, by the way, and the title is Aesthetics and Writing in Psychoanalysis. So I precisely address in that paper the important issue that you emphasized here.
I see that we have no more questions, so I think we can close our morning, and wonderful, wonderful morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.